And all right, there we go. So Max, thanks so much for being here, and the whole team here. I'll maybe let everybody introduce themselves, but Max, as you know, we have Lotus as our consultants with Emily and Rachel, and as a subcontractor, Wiley with us. And we've asked Tony and Jeffrey to be here today from our staff, as well as Ellen and I. As you know, the transition with losing Zach and then also losing Brian, we had to flip a little bit here. And so we're all catching up a little bit on everything, but I think Emily and her team have done a great job of putting this together. What we really want to do today is kind of, once we go through this with you, is ask if we got it right, if you think the data is correct, given what you were able to supply to us, and we were hoping others to supply to us, and give us an idea if there were any fatal flaws that you saw, and then just have a discussion about, what's next and where we're going with this material. So does that sound good?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, I'd love it if you guys kind of just gave me we have time to give me kind of a quick synopsis review of how you got to where you are from the stuff that we all gave to you.
I think Emily is ready to do that right now. So Emily, any other introductions, or Ellen, anything else that I forgot?
I actually haven't met Jeffrey or Tony.
Oh,
would you mind doing a quick introduction? And I can introduce myself too in our team.
Sure. Jeffrey is our new CBO, and I'll let him say a couple words. And Tony is our long-term senior plans examiner and combo inspector, I guess, but mainly plans examining, and really helping support transition with Jeff in the new role. And Tony, Jeff and Tony are probably going to be working the closest with us on potentially writing new regulations as we move forward. As Max knows, we have our net zero goal for 2030 with the building energy code. So that's that's coming up, and we've got to get those things online, as well as knowing and thinking about how we might incorporate any of this into the building codes or the land use codes, or any other way we might want to take a look at it. So they're going to be really important to this process. But Jeff, do you want to, or Tony, you guys want to say anything introduction wise?
No, you kind of summed everything up. I'm glad to be here. I like Max, just did a once over of the document. So this is all kind of new to me as well.
Tony, anything?
Yeah, my name's Tony. I got Max's done, so now I can be here. Anyway, I'm part of the department, and I've been involved with the energy code really through 2 or 3 iterations of it now, and looking forward to seeing where it's going in the future here.
Right.
Well, it's nice to meet both of you, and I'm Emily. I was the project manager for this project. I'm really overseeing all of the deliverables and coordinating all the pieces. And then my colleague Rachel is on the call. Rachel, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Meyer. I'm an associate with Lotus. I helped out with a lot of the data calculations and the making of the story map to help summarize the results. So it's been fun. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Rachel. And Wiley, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Wiley Hodgson. I'm an independent contractor.
Uh-oh.
I think he froze.
Do some of the calculations behind the carbon, the amount of carbon within some of the building materials. So we'll go into details on that. But Max, obviously we had conversations back in the fall, and we'll dive into that about what we were able to gather from you and other resources to come up with those estimates.
Great, thank you. So I was planning to cruise through the story map, review what I wanted to, I thought were important take-home pieces, and see what feedback and questions you all had. Is that a good place to start? Okay, great. And then we can actually walk through some of the calculations. And Max, to your question, at that point, we can talk about how the data that you and others provided informed the calculations. And then we want to hear from all of you about next steps and potential solutions around embodied carbon. Does that work? Okay, great. Rachel and I will be tag teaming notes. So if you see us flipping our gaze, it's just with two screens and we're looking back and forth. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen with everyone if that works. Can you see the story map right now? Does it say embodied carbon? Okay, great. So this is the front page of the story map. And the way that this is configured is we have the key findings. So think about this is kind of like the intro or the executive summary for a written report. And then if you were to scroll down, you can click here and this will bring you to all of the different chapters or sections of the narrative. If you prefer, we also have this written up as a traditional Word document and a PDF, if that's easier to review. Zach had requested that we put it in a story format so it can be better accessed by the public. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the findings. So this was really motivated by the county's emergency climate declaration, and they are already addressing operational emissions or operational use through building codes, land use policies, through a variety of efforts. This looks at embodied carbon, which also includes operational emissions, but it goes beyond that. And embodied carbon, give you this, we'll come back to this, but the definition is really the life cycle. So everything that occurs to build a building, from the extracting of materials, manufacturing, distributing those materials, using them, and then when the home is done, transporting those materials to the landfill and the decomposition of those materials in the landfill. So through this effort, we looked at embodied carbon of new buildings, but we also looked at the operational carbon of homes and the operational carbon associated with building homes and managing homes. So from the results of all of that work, we came up with these 4 recommendations that we think the city should consider. This is what we want to hear from you. And then also, as I understand, in the summer, there will be an opportunity to present this to the Board of County Commissioners, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the public. But the 4 high-level takeaways are that we see the residential operation emissions increase by a magnitude of 3 for homes over 10,000 square feet. So it doesn't just mean a home uses more energy because it's larger, it uses 3 times as much energy because it's larger. So that's one area to address policies. We found that transportation emissions from workers who travel to and from the construction site to build homes and to and from sites to manage homes are another significant source of emissions. Simply, it's because the people who are working on homes and managing homes aren't living close to where they're working. They're driving, you all know this better than we do, but driving all the way from Rifle, Grand Junction to work at homes in Aspen, and it creates a significant footprint in the transportation sector. Another recommendation was that the county could address embodied carbon by looking at low embodied carbon materials, specifically for concrete, steel, wood, and glazing. In that, another way to address emissions is by looking at the transportation distance for some of those materials. Ornamental steel and finished wood had a higher carbon impact than we would see for other communities, simply because they're sourced all over the world and they're not sourced locally. So those are the 5 high-level takeaways from this. We have some policy recommendations here based on what others are doing that we can get into in a little bit later. But I wanted to bring your attention to the other sections of the story map. So this page is just reiterating why we're here. We're in a climate emergency. This is an image from NASA, which shows over time, we were at a pretty consistent level of CO2. And then since the Industrial Revolution, or shortly thereafter, CO2 has really spiked. And so we're on track, I read a couple of days ago, to increase emissions globally by, I think, 2 degrees Celsius. And 1.5 is really the safe level. So we need to act. And that's what's really driving all of this work. One thing, I don't know if you all caught on to this, but there was a report that the Rocky Mountain Climate Organization did and said that if we don't act, the climate of Aspen could resemble the climate of Golden or Fort Morgan. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Front Range, but it's dry, it's desert-like. And so they're anticipating a potential increase of up to almost 10 degrees by the end of the century. So one of the ways that we need to address carbon is through embodied carbon. And this image just details all of the stages of a life cycle. And you probably already know this. From extracting the raw materials to landfilling it. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create an image like this so we could change the size of the icons throughout the story map to demonstrate which part of the life cycle most of the emissions are coming from. So we will get to that in just a second. This is a really cool graphic. I think it is. It's pretty simple, and we stole this from someone else. We created it. We recreated it, so I don't take credit for it. But basically what it's saying is that when you think of buildings, there's 2 sources of emissions. There's the operational emissions, which is defined as the energy being consumed in the building. So the electricity, natural gas, propane, there's that. And then there's the embodied carbon, which is the extracting materials, the transporting materials to the end of life. Today, globally, operational carbon is more significant than embodied carbon. But as new building codes come along, as homes and buildings become more efficient, and as the grid gets greener, the contribution of operational energy will decrease over time. And at one point, it will be 0 because our grid will be 100% renewable energy and our homes will be very efficient. But embodied carbon, unless we make a choice, it will not go away. And its contribution to this cumulative effect will be more significant. And the decisions that we make today are in place for the lifetime of the home. The national average of a life expectancy of a home is about 39 years. We brought that down a little bit because anecdotally we hear that the life expectancy of a home in Pickens County is less. Zach was sharing with us, sometimes it's down to 2 or 3 years, sometimes it's 15 years. But essentially, whatever choices we make today are locking in those emissions. You can't change the material types in a building after they're part of the building. And we just wanted to point out that this isn't a new idea that Pickens County came up with. This is something that communities are advocating for all over the country. And just last year, the state of Colorado enacted the Buy Clean legislation, which requires that any project with the Office of the State Architect or the DOT has to use low embodied carbon materials by January, and it goes into effect January 1st, 2024. So it's for 7 materials. And typically when that happens, local govs start to follow or start to at least get interested. And so we know that this is coming. So as part of the embodied carbon analysis, although it's not embodied carbon, we looked at the operational carbon impacts from those activities that support construction and home management. And I want to bring your attention to this image. So back in 2017, there was an energy use study completed for homes in Pickens County, and they wanted to understand how much energy is being used by homes of different sizes. Are you all familiar with the term EUI? Yeah, okay. So in our world, we generally assume an EUI is more or less static, but what they found was that the EUI varies by home size. So a large home, in this case, we define it as 10,000 square feet, actually uses, its EUI is 3 times the size of a smaller home that's 2,000 square feet. And so this supports that first recommendation that one of the policies or one of the things the county should look at is addressing operational use in large homes. And the reason is because even though the homes are all following the same building code and they're energy efficient, the larger homes have more energy consuming appliances, more, they have swimming pools or hot tubs, or you all know this probably better than I do, but they have all of these energy intensive devices. So before I move on, I know I'm going kind of fast. Does this all make sense? Any questions or thoughts so far? All good? Okay, cool. So then I wanted to move on. We also looked at the operational emissions from construction and home management economy. Again, not embodied carbon, but the energy that's used to support these. And I like to think of it as more like that instantaneous use. So emissions for stationary energy equipment that's used on site, or vehicles to transport workers, or the waste that's generated. So it's emissions that occur in a year. What we found was that the transportation emissions from workers who travel into the sites is the most significant source of emissions. So I'll walk you through that. So for managing new homes. So we defined, we broke up managing new homes into two categories: folks that manage homes that were part of HOAs and folks that manage large homes. And working with Zach, we define large homes as any home that's equal to or above 5,750 square feet. So we identified all of the potential emission sources for these two activities and put it together. And we found that the emissions from managing homes are larger than the emissions from constructing homes. Not embodied carbon again, but just operational carbon. And when we dive in a little bit more granular, we find that the emissions from managing large single family homes are more significant than emissions from managing HOA homes. And this is a breakdown. This is called a tree map. So you can see we looked at 3 primary emission sources in each area. This mint green color are the emissions from transportation from the home management economy. And this brown color are emissions from constructing homes. The reason that these emissions are so high is because we collected data from the county that showed that the average distance traveled for contractors was 88 miles per trip. And this was really pretty accurate data. During COVID, the county sent out a travel survey. So every contractor that was doing work for a 1-year period had to enter in where their workers were coming from and the number of workers that were coming from these different places. Rachel did amazing data magic, consolidated and organized this data and put it together, and so we could come up with numbers determining where everyone is coming from. Conversations with property managers indicated that people were visiting these large homes a lot, and that's why there were so many trips. So managed HOA properties were requiring approximately 1 trip a day, while large single family homes required up to 27 trips per week. And that was just for small things that the families would need when they were on site. And they said that typically these homes were occupied about 2 months out of the year. So for about 2 months, maybe 3 months out of the year, the home management company was making 27 trips per week. At the other times when the home wasn't managed, there was still a full crew managing the property, making up to 7 trips per week. So when we put all of these numbers together, we determined that over 53 million vehicle miles were as a result of building and managing new homes. And this is 25% of the entire region's vehicle miles traveled. And I won't go into this, but we linked to another project that we did where we looked at more specifically emissions in the different sectors for the different areas. So if you were to click here for Pitkin County, you can see the breakdown of emissions in more detail. Great. So that tells us that transportation emissions are pretty significant. Next, we looked at embodied carbon from new constructions and remodels. And basically the take-home message here was that we could lower embodied carbon if we use materials that had a lower embodied carbon content, and if we also address the distance from which some of these materials were coming from. So I'm just going to give you a high overview of what all of this means. This is not a graphic we created. This is a pretty famous graphic. I just wanted to share it with you so you could understand where all of the emissions are coming from and the typical breakdown. these percentages you see down here are global averages, and they don't necessarily apply to Picken County. But the take-home message here is that generally most of the emissions from embodied carbon come from upfront carbon. Upfront is stages A1 through A3. It's the raw material to the manufacturing. And so this is really a place where the manufacturers have control over. This is a function of their processes and their sourcing. And then all of these other things are, I think, more variable and site specific. So we were able to calculate the average embodied carbon metric per home size. And so these were different bins that Wiley was able to come up based on the data that they collected. The one to really bring your eyes to is this middle one. So on average, this is the amount of embodied carbon that's emitted per square foot of the home. And as you can see, the numbers increase as the home size increases. We also included a conservative and an achievable number. Conservative means that 80% of the products that they could have used have a lower embodied carbon footprint. Achievable means that only 20%. So achievable is really like if you have your eye embodied carbon, this is where you could go. And the difference between conservative and achievable is somewhere between 15 and 22%. So it's a pretty good difference if you just really keep your eyes on the embodied carbon of the materials. What we did then is we looked at how these numbers apply to homes within Picken County. So this includes new homes and existing homes, and it's just a heat map. And so you can see really where the concentration of embodied carbon is within the county. Give you a second to look at that. And this was data that the county gave us. So they have the square footage of all homes in the county. And then we wanted to look at, okay, if we want to address embodied carbon, where should we be focusing our efforts? There's a couple ways to look at this. You can include embodied carbon with operational energy, or you can include it without. And so we looked at both ways. So if we were to include operational carbon within the embodied carbon consideration, it's about half. So about 50% of the emissions we need to be concerned with are that upfront carbon. So the material extraction, the material manufacturing. The other half is from operational. And so we know that these are the two areas, if we really wanted to make a dent in carbon, where we should be focusing our time. And we looked at this to see if it varied by home size. So these are for homes less than 4,000 square feet. These are for homes above 4,000, but less than 8,000. And then these are for homes greater than 8,000. And really, it's about 50-50 in every single case. But I wanted to bring your attention to this one. If we were to take operational carbon out of the equation, 96% of all of the emissions come from the materials used to construct the home. This is really large. It's maybe larger for Picken County than we've seen for other communities, but it's not surprising. This is what we expect. So this means this is really where we need to focus our efforts. So if we're going to dive down and focus our efforts on materials, we want to understand which materials we should be looking at. This is a tree map of the different materials that make up the most embodied carbon. So concrete and windows are by far the most. And then we see ornamental steel and finished woods. And we really define these as those that are more used for aesthetics and less for structural. Most embodied carbon, you would see this, except this would be structural steel and structural woods. So this is a little bit different. The reason that these numbers are higher is because from our conversations with folks, we understood that these two materials are sourced from all over the world. So because they're sourced from greater distances, their emissions are higher because they have a higher travel. They have a longer travel distance than if they were sourced locally. And then we did the same thing for project remodels. So it looks like this tells me a lot of projects are being remodeled for aesthetics because ornamental steel is the material that has the most emissions, then glazing, finished wood, and concrete. So if we're looking at renovations, these are the material types we'd like to focus our efforts on. And then we wanted to point out how emissions might change over time. So the county does have a net zero goal. So in 2030, all homes built should not have any more operational carbon emissions because they should be net zero and the grid is getting cleaner, so that does seem feasible. But what happens is that embodied carbon will still be there and it makes up the biggest piece of the pie. And when you look at this, this is a little bit, I think it was confusing to me when I first think about this. Each chunk here shows a chunk of homes built in that particular year. So 2026 means this is the emissions from the homes built in 2026 that are adhering to the 2024 IECC. And then in 2027, these would be homes within the building code, the 2027 IECC, and that's what the counties are adopting. And so that's why you see these changes, because there's impacts to the building codes that are represented here, and then also impacts to the number of homes that are being built. So finally, and we can talk about, maybe I'll pause on this before we get here. I think I'll pause on this and we'll come back to it. Any questions on any of that I just presented? Oh, Cindy, you're muted.
Max, does it feel right, given the data that you know about
Good question.
construction side?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily surprised by anything in that realm. I mean, it's depressing more than anything. But no, I think that's probably what I was expecting with those materials. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
And I guess I'd ask the same question of Tony and Jeffrey. You see everything comes through too. So do those numbers seem right on or not?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Max. That seems to be the trend.
I mean, I guess the ornamental iron, if anything, was a little bit surprising to me, but I guess that just because it doesn't seem like that big of a portion of all of our jobs, but it's just the embodied carbon is that high for that process, and it's all coming from raw materials from a long ways away. So once I thought more thoroughly through it, I guess it doesn't surprise me.
What about stone and tile materials? Those seem to come from a long distance typically.
Did you say stone? Stone?
Tile materials
Oh,
seem to come from long distance and require large amounts of energy to transport them.
did we look at, I don't think we looked at, Wiley, did we I don't think we captured data on stone. Is that right?
Stone actually, hey, Tony, yeah, it's under masonry.
Masonry, thank you.
So yes, so it's in there, and we can I can jump into this now, kind of give you a high level methodology, or Emily, if you want to go through the rest of the story map, we can kind of circle back to it.
I think this would be a great place for it.
Okay, so Max, I think you have a general sense of kind of where we were headed with our method, and Jeffrey and Tony just kind of give you a really high level explanation of how we calculated the embodied carbon for the materials. Ultimately, there's a software that's populated with data coming from manufacturers. Like Burnco will say, here's what we think the embodied carbon is of concrete, and they'll submit it to this kind of, Emily can kind of give you a better explanation of the software, but I believe it's a nonprofit, and they collect data, and you can input your amount of building materials you are using on a particular project, and we'll use that data that's fed from these third-party suppliers about what the embodied carbon is in metric tons per some given unit. So for concrete, we're talking about how many yards of concrete we put into the project, and then you can from there say, okay, well, there's X amount of yards, more yards, and so there we have, multiply that across whatever that per unit metric ton of carbon is, and then you have your embodied carbon for that particular project. So the challenge for us on this particular assignment was to figure out what was the amount of materials going into a sample of homes, across Pickens County's territory. And we initially were looking to get scheduled values, but we weren't able to get those. Max was actually I think was more the exception than the rule. He was able to give us some of his scheduled values, which we used for part of our sample of homes. But ultimately, we were using use tax returns to figure out what the amount of materials were used. And so, as I'm sure you both know, and use tax returns have have a lot of great data in there from the builders, others are a little more lighter. So we definitely had to kind of go with whatever we could that had better populated information. And in there, kind of getting back to your question, Tony, about sometimes it was just there, it'd be masonry, there'd be a line item for it. We know how much a builder reported that was on the use tax return for how many dollars they spent on that particular material. And then to back into what the actual amount of material was, in this case, tons of masonry, we'd have to get a price point on what that cost was, per ton. And so we would that's where we did a lot of secondary research to kind of figure out. And we also did primary research talking to Max and other builders about what different costs might be for, for different materials. And then we could kind of back into how much material was actually used for that particular home. So, other cases, going back to the use tax returns, they wouldn't be necessarily, a line item for just masonry, but we could, we'd look for different, if there are vendors listed, we go through the vendor list and, try to figure out, okay, is this an appropriate proxy for what the amount of stone would be used in this case? So that is a really high level explanation for how we are coming up with these material amounts. Let me just pause there. Any questions, Jeffrey or Tony, on how that approach worked?
No.
Okay.
I think I'm good. Yep.
Yeah.
So, but what you're saying, Wiley, is you weren't able to get a lot of schedules of values. It's a little concerning to me because, as you probably found, and that was your only way to get it, use tax may not be super accurate.
So so Max, you're right. We weren't able to, other than I think you, and I'm trying to recall if we got anything else. I think I have to go back and check the records what we got, but you were primarily the only builder that was able to approve us to use schedule of values. So in that case, there's pros and cons. And yes, the use tax returns, like we just mentioned, some were clean, some were not so clean, some were kind of in the middle, but it also allowed us to get a wider range of builders. So
that's true.
Rather than just looking at Divide Creek builders and your homes, we were able to get kind of a larger swath of the builders in the area. So that was helpful. That said, even once you get down to that sample, some of those use tax returns are very, very detailed, and some were, of course, a little bit more summed up. And
It's people applying for a refund on their use tax.
Yes, or whatever they need to, so there is catalog. So you have it's supposed to reflect just materials, not labor, and it's all materials purchased outside of Pitt County, I believe. And then that is.
And how far back in time did you go?
So I believe we had use tax returns going back as far as 2016. I'm just looking at my records here. I think that was as far back as we went. So let me just confirm that if I can. It looks like 2017 is what we had, Tony. So, and we went as far forward as 2020. That was kind of the range we had. So that was what we received from the county, and we did generally keep prices fairly stable. But obviously with the we weren't using 2021 lumber prices when we were trying to estimate what the cost of or what the amount of lumber was. We were looking more retrospectively at what lumber prices would have been in 2017 or 2018 or whatever year we were looking at.
So we're using the actual tax value and then working backwards.
Well, whatever the builders so if they for whatever reason, if the tax return did not have, if they just kind of was a lump sum, we couldn't, because there's obviously no way to break out materials at that point. So
the tax methodology changed 2 or 3 years ago. It's a different formula now. So I don't know if that came into play.
No, not so much, because it was all kind of starting, I think, with the raw data that the builders would provide. And I did see those, I didn't realize that, but I did see the calculations they would then, I could kind of see the steps they would take. They kind of,
actually has gone down quite a bit from 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, right. No, that sounds right. And I would see them do their calculation for what the tax would need to be, or if there was a refund due and whatnot. But again, it all kind of started with that beginning raw data of what their receipts are, were for.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
As far as getting a hold of final schedule of values, isn't that public knowledge? Shouldn't we be able to provide that, a final schedule of values?
Well, we spoke with Brian about it, and there seemed to be a little bit of resistance in sharing all that without getting prior permission from the builders. So we went down that road, and again, ultimately, Max was quick to respond and get approval, but we had a tougher time.
Yeah, that's all proprietary information that we can't release without,
Mm-hmm.
from builders who supplied it.
Yeah, there's obviously sensitive pricing data in there, I can imagine. So ultimately that was the data we relied on to do our calculation. But again, it was kind of trying to determine, what we're ultimately trying to get back to, how much material was used in, a specific unit, again, tons, cubic yards, and so on, total square footage of glazing, things like that.
Yeah, I'll really echo what Wiley was saying. That data collection piece was probably the most difficult of this effort. We spent a few months brainstorming how to get that data, and we went through different ideas and kind of circling around, and it was hard to get that. But can you all see this spreadsheet? Okay, so this was the actual spreadsheet that we created. Everything in blue can be input and changed. So if at any point the county would like to explore this more, update the numbers, you can change these values and all of the other calculations will change. So it's not a static thing if better data becomes available.
Well, and I hope you don't think my comments were being too critical of you, because I see where you're getting at. I mean, you had to get data from somewhere, and if you weren't getting it from us general contractors, you had to get it from somewhere. And like you're saying, the positives of that was you were able to get many more projects entered in this. I think it's probably considerably less accurate this way for each project, but probably in the long run becomes more accurate for the whole page because there's more projects entered. So I see where you're coming from, and I hope I didn't sound too critical. I understand why you had to do that. It makes sense.
No criticism take by any means, and I appreciate the feedback on it. Yeah, and we did some checks in there too, Max, to try to just some sanity checks to make sure when we did our final calcs, make sure there wasn't more drywall than paint and stuff like that, and so if we came across those, we would go back in there and try to figure out if there was something we had missed or if there was something that needed to be adjusted, and if it just wasn't making sense, we would drop that particular house from our sample set just because it was nonsensical. We couldn't figure out, we were going to make up numbers to make it work. We're just trying to make sure our sanity checks kept this house, whatever house we're looking at, realistic in so many ways. And so we had a couple of those sanity checks to make sure that, again, that we were working with data that represented what we thought would be a fair house, and that without any weird anomalies.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wiley. That's really helpful. So for the rest of the call, I was planning on walking you through some of the calcs if it's not too detailed, and then opening up for brainstorming about how we can best come together and address some of these issues. Are you all interested in going through the calcs? Would that be helpful? I won't go too detailed. Okay, I'll do a high level. So as Wiley mentioned, we grabbed environmental product declarations from this tool put together by the Carbon Leadership Forum, the Building Transparency Institute, and SCANSA. And so they have this repository of all of these EPDs that manufacturers put together for projects. It's free. Anyone can access it. Anyone can download this. Anyone can model their buildings. So basically for this part, we just mimicked that tool and created it in spreadsheet form, so you all could adapt it and use it for your needs. So these are all of the EPDs that we grabbed. We also spoke to different builders to figure out where the materials are sourced, because that influences where we grab the EPDs from. It may not be from the specific supplier, because often those don't exist, but we could grab them from, we know a lot of the concrete is produced in Carbondale, and so we could grab EPDs from Colorado, the wood from the Pacific Northwest. And then this was the work that Wiley was talking about. So we kept the homes anonymous, but we just noted where they were located, and then Wiley and his team were able to calculate the quantities of materials. And then from that point on, it was essentially just, From that point on, it was essentially just multiplying those EPDs by the material quantity for the different materials. And then we did it for the achievable and the conservative estimates. And then you just add it up, and that's how that works. And then we also looked at the different stages, which are not always looked at because there's so much emphasis on the materials. The other stages are pretty small in comparison, but we wanted to provide a complete view and really demonstrate where the carbon is coming from. So based on the feedback that we got from everyone about where materials were coming from, we were able to calculate, that's what this is right here. Now you can see it. The emissions from transporting all of the materials, and we made some assumptions. So that's why I think the ornamental steel and the finished woods are so high. The EPDs will include that as the global EPDs, but also we calculate their transportation from just averages and including transporting over sea and over land. And then we looked at any emissions from the equipment that was used on site and any waste that was generated during the construction. And these numbers are really small. So we're looking at, 20. So 8 to 30 with an average of 20 when you combine both of these, whereas the upfront carbon, and there's a summary at the top, is in the 700. So this is a pretty minor source of it. We also looked at refrigerant use in the homes, and we assumed that larger homes would include both a regular furniture, but also a commercial refrigerator, and that homes would include AC. And these represent the annual leakage rates based on some studies from EPA. This is just the use. So this is generally what you think of the energy being used in the home. We did a separate effort where we also did greenhouse gas emissions inventories for all of the different municipalities within Pitkin County. And so this aligns with that. And then finally, we looked at the emissions from the end of life stage. This is pretty high level estimate. There's not really good data that we could use. So we estimated actually some standards out of the UK, but these are the numbers that are still being used in the United States. So this would be a potential to improve accuracy. These stages account for the deconstruction, demolition, transporting the waste, processing the waste, and then the degradation of the waste in landfills. But it's so tiny. So even improving accuracy, I mean, it's important, but it's not going to change the take-home message of this. Is this helpful? This spreadsheet's designed so the county can use it. So all of these white cells are formulas or constants that will never ever change. And then all of the blue cells are something that can be changed. So if you were to change this, everything in the spreadsheet would get updated.
I mean, I'll speak for myself. I think it was very helpful.
Oh,
I have
good.
one question.
Yeah.
Do you have data from other municipalities or other areas that have done similar things? And I ask that for two big reasons. Number one, I'm wondering how we differ from other areas, which is probably pretty significantly just because of the level of home that we're building here, number one, and our remoteness, number two. But also, you know, our numbers are based on only a certain amount of homes, and it sure would be nice to see if, you know, just to see how accurate we are compared to what other areas are getting. So, I mean, twofold and two totally different reasons, but I'm wondering if you have any comparisons of other analyses.
So we've done an embodied carbon analysis for the city and county of Denver, and that the way that analysis was going to inform policy was a little bit different. They were looking at like policies for building types like mixed use commercial, residential. So we looked at that a little bit differently. And what I found when I compared those numbers here was that the embodied carbon emissions for the residential homes were higher than what we were seeing in Denver. And I'm assuming that is some of the material types that were chosen. And that's what we've done. I think that study is public, so I'm happy to share that. I can share that with everyone after this call. That's the only work that we've done. I know Telluride just put together an embodied carbon calculator, but I haven't seen it. All of this stuff is pretty new. So Denver and Pitkin County are the only two municipalities that I'm aware of that have done a pretty comprehensive embodied carbon analysis in the state. But as I mentioned, the state of Colorado will be coming out with their guidance in 2024. And the way that they are doing it is exactly how we've done it here. They're using the same calculator, they're using the same EPDs, and then they're just focusing on this upfront carbon.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, I guess that therein lies the rub, is that we want to be as cutting edge on these things as we can be, right? But that means that there's very little other details to look at from other people, I guess. But it'd be interesting to see if Telluride would be interested in sharing what they've got, because that's a similar market. And it'd be interesting to see if their numbers are coming up similar to ours, because my guess is they will. And then that really makes us feel confident that we're right in the area. And if they're not, then that makes me think that we need to dig into it a little bit further to make sure, something may be off. But I wonder if they'd be interested in sharing.
The other thing I add to that, Emily, maybe you're headed this direction, was just make sure, when we, comparing to Telluride or any other municipality, that, we're comparing apples to apples. And so that, what I mean by that is make sure the scope of what's included in those submissions is the same, for what this study did versus what Telluride or what Denver did. So if they're only looking at, body carbon and materials, but not operational, or they're not looking at the end of life component of it. So if they left any of those components out, then the Pitkin County number would be higher, or vice versa. If they did a more extensive scope that was larger than this one, then the Pitkin County numbers could be potentially smaller. So point being, as Emily mentioned, this is a newer methodology. So if we're to do benchmarking, just make sure it's all kind of apples to apples, I would say.
Yeah, I did compare the numbers too. So this is being done a lot more in Europe, and it's been done for a few years. So I did compare these numbers with some home numbers that I found over in Scotland and the UK, and I realized there's so many differences. But I thought what was interesting was that a lot of the homes that those were based on were like all built the same. They all looked the same. They were smaller. They were kind of like like row houses, and their numbers were so much smaller. And I think it's just a reflection of the innovation, the creativity with building these homes, and then the different materials that are required to support that innovation, and just how that plays out in the numbers. I hope that makes sense what I just said. It's a little all over the place, but I think benchmarking is a really important point.
Makes sense.
I wonder, we also did this is the analysis that we did for the construction economy and the home management economy. We looked at stationary energy sources, and this was based on conversations with contractors, and then also research for just what kind of machines and what kind of stationary energy sources are being used on site. And then, as we mentioned, the transportation data. And this came, so the county didn't provide this number, but we calculated this number based on the data that the county provided about where everyone was traveling from. So that's 17 million for building homes. And then for the larger homes, we have 7 plus 28, so 35 million VMTs. That's where we came up with the 53 million. And then we looked at waste generated. And this is the same thing, although, yeah. This spreadsheet, again, if anything changes in the future, or you want to see how things could be different, everything it's designed, so you just change certain cells. In this case, I think it's yellow. Or what color is it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, that one was not coordinated, color coded the right one. But if you change these numbers, then everything will change and it can reflect. So if better data comes available, we can do that.
Hey,
So
Emily, this is Cindy. When we do, if we do keep up with this sort of like our ongoing map of
yeah,
data, is it somehow archived as well so that we don't lose, you know, the years before, and we can have a data range?
do you mean that you could like add in new data and it would include it? Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm just concerned that we don't, that we have, say, 2021 to go back to, if we data that we have new data in 2023, so that we don't, so that we can see those trends.
Oh, so the calculator doesn't have the ability for you to like add a new row and have all the new data populate, but you could save this one, then create a new one and then just replace the entry.
Just save it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one thing that we wanted to hear from all of you was that there are best practices about how to address this. And I'll just run through these fairly quickly, but one is to reuse and salvage building materials. There's some great examples out of Europe of buildings that have been doing this, and they've been able to cut down a lot on waste materials, to just use the least amount of material quantities as possible, either by, through the design process or through the size of the home. Another one is to just really focus on using low embodied carbon materials. And we wanted to acknowledge that we recognize that this is really hard, that Pitkin County isn't located in an area where it's easy to source all kinds of different materials, and we have a choice of 100 different things. But we know that this is where we're heading towards over time. And concrete, steel, and wood are really the three sectors that are really focusing on this. So there's different associations, manufacturers are becoming really aware of this and doing what they can. Steel manufacturers are looking at this, and as our general grid gets cleaner, embodied carbon with steel will go down because it's such an energy intensive resource. And then a couple of things to point out. One way to reduce the carbon of concrete is to include fly ash or blast furnace slag. Cindy and I were brainstorming that, maybe there'd be an ability to include this from the Somerset mine, the coal mine over in Somerset, with the concrete production over in Carbondale. So that's a really cool cutting edge circular economy opportunity. With steel, one thing that you can do is always source it from North America. North America's steel uses these electric arc furnaces to reduce it. So it creates lower emissions using FSC wood when using wood in projects. And then I just wanted to point out what some other people are doing. So there's a lot of buy clean legislation at the state level. In addition, the city of Austin is doing buy clean carbon legislation. And this is basically when a local gov or a state gov says, these are the maximum embodied carbon values that we will allow for different material types. Or what New York is doing is when they offer bids for projects, the embodied carbon is part of the selection criteria. So those with lower embodied carbon values score higher on the selection process. There is facilitating partnerships and getting other manufacturers to look at their EPDs. EPDs are available for a lot of the products, but not all of them, but more are coming online every single day. Developing embodied carbon goals. Vancouver, Canada just committed to a 40% reduction in embodied carbon by 2030. So that could help change the market. Marin County is looking at a net zero embodied carbon policy. So these are some ideas just based on what others are doing. And we wanted to see if you all had ideas, or if you tried to look at this before, if you run into stumbling blocks, or what else do we need to know to make this feasible for the county? Or is it feasible?
No, great summary, I think. Yeah, I think, Max, we're going to put you on the spot here. Is there anything that looks like it's doable, or things that might already be even happening in the industry, as far as any of the big ticket items here that could kind of be the biggest bang for the buck?
And Cindy, you may not see the whole screen, but Tony's got his hand up. You want to, Tony, respond first, or Max jump in?
Max can go.
Thanks, Tony. I think it's really interesting, somewhat overwhelming, of course, probably to all of us. I'm, of course, trying to think of things realistically on our ends, because this stuff all makes sense. Most of it's stuff we all know of, but implementation of it, I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to figure out how we could best do this, because the only ways we know of now is to try and push the clientele that we have into using certain products. That's a really hard thing to do in our market, in our industry, and it doesn't feel right. And anytime we've tried this in the past, I feel like on a county issue, like, we had, what was the thing where we had to earn points that we got rid of? I can't even remember what that was called now. And it had a lot of great things that were really similar to this. And it just became so hard for you guys to direct us in the right position and then police it and stuff. But it led to a lot of great things. I think we're in a tough spot here. To force our clientele to do something is difficult, number one, because it's hard to find the right incentives to do that. And number two, to force manufacturing, we're too small of an area to do much in that restraint. But I think on the good side, I think the whole world is going this way. We're seeing a lot more FSC, SFI, all these things getting pushed in all these industries. That's good. And the one thing that I thought that was promising out of all of this is it looks like the vehicle emissions embodied carbon is by far the biggest issue here. Am I right, Emily? From the numbers I was seeing, and that's both on the construction end and on the property management end. And when I saw that, that makes a lot of sense. Look at the traffic that is on our roads, and it's continually, and it's oftentimes one person in a vehicle. And I know the reasons why. I try to get the way around that all the time, but it's usually, we need to get this material from site A to site B. We certainly, in the construction industry, we can't have people riding buses, right? We've got tools that we've got to travel with. We've got materials we've got to travel with. So really that's leading me to, especially in the property management and also in my business, how do we become closer tied to hybrid and electric vehicles? That's really the best and simplest solution that would make the biggest difference. How we do that, I have no idea, especially because right now you can't even get an electric vehicle. Am I right there, Emily? If I read that right, there's a lot of things that we can do and should be doing in the construction, in the demolition, in the transportation. But really these vehicle miles in our valley are what's killing us bigger than anything. And we're not going to solve that by, we know we're trying to get as many people that work in the industry as close as possible, but that's not a short-term solution that we can have, right? So how do we make less imprint with these miles would be where I see the biggest bang for our buck, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yep, I think that's a really good point. For the operational emissions of transportation is kind of mind-blowing. And it's also, I think it's, I don't know, listening to the people that we spoke with, encouraging carpooling is also difficult because people are coming from all different ways. And I would imagine if I was driving an hour and a half to work, stopping to pick up my colleague, 15 minutes out of the way, get back on the highway. I mean, that people don't want to do that. That's another disincentive. So maybe there is.
Well, the thing that has helped that is fuel costs, right? So
Oh, right.
people get motivated by that, but and I've found that in the last couple of years, people are more motivated to carpool than they used to be.
Oh, good.
But it's only logistically possible sometimes. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
times it's somebody has to go to this site and then to that site later, whereas the other person doesn't. So, but I think the want is there, especially with fuel prices being so high right now. I don't know. It just seems like that's where we could get our biggest bang for our buck is the emissions. And I'm not saying to give up on any of this other stuff. I love the idea of the fly ash stuff. I mean, it made me want to go directly to Travis Stewart over here at the plant, and he's just a great guy, and ask him if they've been thinking about any of this stuff, because I'm sure he'd be on board with discussing it. And I think all these other things are our end, certainly slowly starting to push architects and owners, clientele, and everybody for as much as they can do within that realm. But it's hard to push somebody who's spending this much money and wants to be in our area to say, hey, let's not get this stone that you really want. Let's go with the other stuff that you don't really like, but it's still almost as expensive because of a less carbon footprint. I'm going to get some eye rolling at that one. And I don't know how much I can really realistically push that. Unless we can think of ways of doing some incentivizing like our rent program. And maybe that's the way we do it.
Yeah, and I think in talking to some home builders, like homeowners who are building home, they may not know embodied carbon versus operational. So they're like, but we are being efficient. We're going to have solar. That's good enough. But this other piece isn't widely known how that works. So maybe some outreach around that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest thing you could do, because you're right. When they talk about carbon, they're not thinking about embodied. And I'm learning a lot right here. You taught me a ton about how big of an issue this is. So you're right, getting the word out would be big. And I don't know, I mean, you know that better than I do of how to do that.
So Tony, do you want to jump in? And then I've got a question too.
Okay. Well, to answer Max's question about fly ash, in the previous energy code under the efficient building program, you could get points for having 20% fly ash in your concrete, and the batch plants got to the point where they were putting fly ash in unless you had submitted a mix design that was different, that didn't require fly ash. So I don't know if they've gotten away from that, but I haven't seen a mixed design report in a while, but they were supplying fly ash automatically. So I don't know if they're still doing that. And then to go back to the reusing materials, we bump into the energy code, and there's a connection, particularly with windows. You can't really reuse windows because they don't meet the current energy code. And we've had a few homeowner builders that salvaged windows, and we had to say, no, you can't use them. So there are conflicts between the current energy code and using reusing of materials that could be looked at.
I think that's helpful. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, then is that it, Tony? Is that yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask if there are, and this may, I don't know, this may be a dumb question, but are there any other than the fly ash, are there any other opportunities for local manufacture of lower embodied carbon materials? And by local, I don't mean in Aspen, obviously, but more local than where people are currently sourcing from. Do you guys, I mean, Tony or Jeffrey or Max, can you think of any opportunities here for,
You might talk to Jeff Hess, because that's what he did before. He was materials tech, concrete plants. He was involved with mixed design every day, and see what they got, what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point though. And it's probably difficult just given our area. I mean, We're not an industrial area, so we're not producing much. There's not much to mine or forest here, although, I mean, beetle kill stuff is about it. That being said, I am using local logs right now. There's just not a lot super close that I can think of, but that's a good thing to try and brainstorm if there is more, or if we could think of more locally.
Do you guys see any efficiencies in transportation when materials are ordered? Could there be some sort of a consolidated group, you know, of people whose permits are coming up about the same time, who are ordering similar materials, and perhaps back on the transportation duplication? Do you think that's even doable in your industry?
Well, I think the industry somewhat goes there on its own, especially right now when trucking is so difficult. So that's often done as much as possible straight through the trucking industry without us having to really do anything, especially now when it's really, really hard to get any trucking. So there's more and more of that, and less where you're getting a delivery that's just yours unless you have a full truck. So I think that's a good point, Cindy. And I think that industry is doing a pretty good job on its own. And I don't know, the Biden administration is actually right now trying to improve that a little bit. We'll see if they do. But good point. And guys, unfortunately, I didn't realize it was going this far. I'm going to have to hop off pretty soon here. And I didn't realize we'd be as heavily reliant on me as we are. I love this conversation. I don't know how useful I am to this, but I'm willing to continue it at another time too.
Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. This was recorded. And so we will send you the link in case you want to look over it again and think through some things, share it with friends, maybe a little bit later, but we'll be back in touch. I don't know what else to say. I want to get some of these other guys on board and have them look at this and then go from there. And I want to make sure that we're all as up to speed as we can before this goes public.
Yeah, sorry I have to leave a little early, but thanks
thank
for
you.
all of you guys' work. That was really informative for me, and it's going to be going through my mind for a while here of brainstorming different ways we can figure something out here. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time, Max. We really appreciate it.
Okay, see you guys.
Thank you, Max.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you guys want to stay on for a second, so we can talk about next steps?
Yeah, let's do that. That would be great.
Right. Well, nice presentation, you guys. I think, yeah, really informative. And I think that it's just too bad that other folks couldn't show up while we were meeting. I got an email from Ben, who unfortunately thought I was going to put a calendar hold on his calendar, and I didn't. I just sent that email. So he was off to other things, but what I'd like to do, Bonnie, is get a copy of this recording, a link for it, and I'll send it to the others. And then I'll just ask them if they would please take a look at it, get back to me with any questions. And what I might do is then just call each one of them individually next week.
Okay. Okay, that sounds great.
I mean,
Oh, sorry. Do you have a time when you'd like to get all of the other comments from the other contractors, or a date?
You mean a date by which we need to have it all wrapped up? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. Boy, we meet with the board on the 15th. It would be great to have it all wrapped up by the end of the month. What do you think? Is that too far out?
Oh, that works for us. I don't anticipate any changes. So, I mean, or there could be changes. If there aren't, then that's clearly fine. But we're really just at your speed. So if that's when it works for you, that's just fine. And I'm out the week of April 18th anyways on vacation.
Okay.
And then I was just going to add that it would be great, Jeffrey and Tony, since you're in the field, you're working with contractors daily. If you could, contractors and architects and, the whole gamut and the trades. So if you think there's any aspect of this analysis that you could make people aware of, pick their brains, what do you think? Just kind of gauge the temperature out there. And also let people know that
that this doesn't get out before the board gets it too far,
Well, so Cindy, we're not going to release the analysis. Now Max is going to be out there and others that you contact are out there. Do we not want, maybe I should retract that. Do you not want Tony and Jeffrey to make people aware that we're working on this?
Let me think about that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. We may not want to jump the gun because we'll have to see what the board wants to do with it before we get people too riled up. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, what I'll do is take the link, send it to the other folks, and ask for them to get back to me. Tell them I'll give them a call next week and that I want them to get back to me with thoughts by the end of the month. If they have anything they'd like to add. I just want to give people the opportunity to, discuss it, especially, the property management business, with all their data. I think perhaps we'll need to just sit down with them separately, but Emily, I'm just trying to save you guys from having to do this over and over and over. And, maybe if I have a conversation with Ben and we just kind of get down to the, bottom line of some of his industry's data, then I can have a good conversation. And if need be, we can have another conversation with you guys, focusing it more.
Sure. Yeah. And if you send it to anyone and they have questions or comments they'd like to discuss, we could set up a call. I'm happy to join that call. And when you send the recording, we can also send you the meeting minutes from this discussion to share.
You can send us the what?
Oh, the meeting minutes from this discussion.
Okay, awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we can send that to you, and then if they're like, oh, the transportation doesn't make any sense, let's talk about it. We're happy to set up a call.
So Jeffrey and Tony, never mind my comment. I guess before we get it out into the public.
Just for a little while, and then
Okay, that sounds great. So I'll send you the meeting minutes as soon as they're ready. And then Cindy and Ellen will just wait to hear from you near the end of the month if you have feedback. Should we set up a call maybe that first week of May to chat about next steps?
sounds good.
Okay. Do you want to set it up now?
Sure, I can.
Okay. May 3rd, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th, all look great for me. It never happens.
I love it. Okay. It looks like I'm good the afternoon of May 3rd. How about you, Ellen?
Let me look. Yeah, I don't know what we've got at the board, but
What time, you guys? May 3rd.
How about 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock. Great.
yeah, let's shoot for that.
All right, I'll send out the invite right now.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody. Wiley, good to see you. And thanks so much, Tony and Jeff, and for hopping on, and Rachel for your input. I'm just sorry more people didn't show up, but
Oh, that's okay.
We do. So I know everybody's super busy.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you all being here and appreciate the opportunity to share all of this work. It's pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Thank you very much. Nice work.
Thank you.
It's a lot to digest, and yeah, we'll be brainstorming at the building department on what we can do on our end.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
That would be great. Yeah.
Emily, I felt like this was a great dry run for the board. when
Oh,
we-
good. Good. Excellent. Should I invite Jeffrey or Tony to our call on the 3rd? Or should it just be us?
You guys want to be on that call on the 3rd? Next steps?
Sure, sure.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, I don't know if I have your email, Tony.
Tony.Popish, P-O-P-I-S-H at pickenscounty.com.
Okay, got it. Wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See
Take
ya.
care. Bye.